Hey everyone, what is happening? All right, so the last part we just did, we went through the different structural features of the female reproductive system. Now we're going to move on to egg development. Now, um, oogenesis or oogenesis or oogenesis is the development of an egg or ovum and ova for plural, which occurs in the ovary. So if you go back up and look at the female reproductive system, you've got two ovaries on either side. And oogenesis is very similar to spermatogenesis of the males, except there's a few differences, and we're going to go over those right now. So females are born with all their eggs. These are called primary oocytes or oocytes. This can be approximately 2 to 4 million. Each ovum is contained in a follicle, all right? And we're going to see that in a little bit. Well, in utero, these primary oocytes start meiosis. So remember that meiosis is chromosome reduction. This is really important because when a sperm and an egg meet, they both have to be 1N or haploid so that they can make a diploid cell and that you have all your chromosomes. Now, what happens is they start meiosis in utero, and then they get suspended in this thing called mitotic arrest until puberty, where they finish meiosis 1 in the ovary. They go from a 2N to 1N or diploid to haploid just before ovulation, all right? And then they only fully complete meiosis 2 once they've been fertilized. This is really important, and this is different than men. So when the egg is fertilized by a sperm, that's when it finally goes through meiosis 2 and it gets fully reduced down to one primary oocyte. This is unlike males who, once they hit puberty, they can make sperm for pretty much their entire life. So the female follicle is made up of these cells called granulosa cells, and you're going to see this as I draw some stuff in a little bit. Now these develop and divide as the follicle matures. Now the most important part here is that granulosa cells produce hormones that prepare the body, more important the uterus, for implantation. They produce estrogen, progesterone, and inhibin, which are all hormones that affect the uterus to prepare it for implantation. All right. Now, once a female hits puberty around 12 to 13 years of age, they start to release one ovum or egg per month. This is called ovulation. Now, each time an egg develops, 15 to 25 also develop at the same time, but a female's body chooses the best one to send out and possibly get fertilized. So what we're going to do is we're going to start right about here, and this is going to be day 1. And we're calling this is the follicular phase. Now, this is because we call it the follicular phase because this is when the egg starts to develop. And this egg is enclosed in granulosa cells. Now, these granulosa cells, and we're just going to draw them, we're going to draw what this looks like right here, is imagine we've got a little circle here, we've got our egg in there, and then around that egg, or that follicle, we've got all these cells, and these are our granulosa cells. And what's interesting is these are producing estrogen, and what that does is it actually causes more granulosa cells to develop. All right. Now, during the follicular phase, which is the follicle is developing, this release of estrogen is helping thicken the endometrial lining in the uterus. So we talked about that in the last video. The estrogen is going to build up that endometrium lining. Now, during the first 5 days or so of the follicular phase, this is when the endometrial lining is shedding. Now it sheds because there's less progesterone and estrogen to keep that endometrial lining built up. So this first little bit there, and we're going to draw this line all the way around, the first 5 days, this is when you're going to have menstruation. Right? So first 5 days, this is going to be menstruation. And it's important to remember that is at the beginning of the cycle. So as we move along, the follicle continues to grow, and it keeps going, gets bigger and bigger. There's more granulosa cells. There's more granulosa cells building up. They're producing more and more estrogen. And what the estrogen is doing is As I said, it's building up the endometrial lining inside the uterus, but it's also giving secondary sex characteristics to females. So increased adipose tissue, which is fat, and then we also have breast development. All right. So as we get down to about day 14, but we're going to talk about day 13 for a second. So at day 13, there's an increase in estrogen. So increase in estrogen. And what this does is it actually causes a surge of luteinizing hormone, and we've heard that when we talked about males before. And what that does is it makes the next day we have ovulation. All right, so an increase in estrogen, it causes a surge in LH, and that causes the ovum to be released. And so day 14, this is ovulation. Now, if you look back into the notes that we just did previously, at that point, the fimbriae, those are their finger-like projections, are going to guide the egg into the fallopian tubes. So the egg goes into the fallopian tubes, and then what's really important here is that is ovulation. So we went from the follicular phase to ovulation, and now we're going to be going to the luteal phase, and it goes all the way back around. Now that follicular phase is always 14 days, no matter what. And so on average, a full cycle is 28 days, but it can vary. So this luteal phase, this phase can vary. So this is after ovulation, and now the follicle turns into this structure called the corpus luteum. All right, so the corpus luteum develops, and estrogen and progesterone are released. And what these both do is they're going to maintain the endometrial lining. They're also going to increase mucosal secretions, as well as increase vascularization. So that is an increase in the blood vessels in the uterine lining. All right, and so that goes through a cycle, and it builds up. So it's going to produce more and more of those hormones. And then as it starts to degenerate right around here, it produces less and less. And then as soon as it gets past a threshold, it no longer can maintain the uterine lining, and then it sheds, and the cycle starts all over again. Now, if fertilization takes place, this would have to happen in the fallopian tubes, because the egg is going to hang out in the fallopian tubes for about 24 hours. There's a critical time to get pregnant. Now, if it isn't fertilized, then it starts to break down, and it gets shed along with the endometrial lining. If it is fertilized, then a whole bunch of other things happen, and the corpus luteum is maintained and produces hormones to maintain the uterine lining. But we're going to get into that later on. Just remember the follicular phase. We've got the granulosa cells are producing estrogen. That leads to an increase in estrogen, which causes LH to surge, which causes the ovulation to take place, and the egg goes into the fallopian tube. And then the corpus luteum takes over, producing hormones, and all of these things are going to affect the uterus. We will be having a little session if anybody has any questions, and we can talk about that stuff over Microsoft Teams. Take care, everyone.